Alrighty. Great games at your table. I'm Jonathan Albin, and it's Nikos RPG. Good morning. We have so much to talk about today on the Soapbox. We're going to be talking about how to party like it's 1979. Now, if you've been a role play gamer for a while, you know the dynamics that we're facing in the world today. And I want to take us back to the roots of the game and how we played when we were kids back in the 70s.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame. Our strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
Welcome, adventurers. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into something you may not have realized that we've lost: the sheer joy of play. Back in my time, I take my teeth out. Back in my day, we used to do things way different and play a lot different than we do today. Back then, we didn't wait for pre-written stories, metagame strategies. We didn't even have the digital tools to help us know what we should or shouldn't do as personas. We picked up sticks, magically turning them into swords, and just had a heyday. And I'm not talking about just sitting at a tabletop playing, but we actually got out there and physically interchanged. And this process, of course, leaving us in a different place and time, was the birthplace, if you will, of role play. And all of a sudden, we had a foundation for making those fantasies that we were running around in the streets goofing around with into an actual play mechanic that would make sense. Now let's fast forward to today. Tabletop role play games are extremely complex. In certain cases, the players are required to have their computers up and operational because you're running off of a tabletop, a virtual tabletop instead of an actual tabletop, and so therefore the playing pieces, the miniatures, are all visually on the screen. And while the roleplay environment perhaps is rich in terms of visuals, it's rather stilted in terms of mechanics, deep settings, and because immersive technology has fundamentally taken over. In gaining these advances, though, have we lost something? Have we lost something fundamental? Have we traded freedom and imagination for structure and imitation? Now, thankfully, we can get this back, and the Nikos RPG mechanism is designed to do just that. And we're going to just look at 5 ways that this mechanism can restore the loss of play. We're going to be talking about how preparation is changed, perhaps a primer on how to imagine, how to be a player in the moment. Perhaps we can look at the very mechanism of a rules system and release some of the limitations that we put on ourselves in terms of our play as we go along. Now, if you love RPGs and just miss the way things were played in the past, or perhaps you never experienced the kind of joy I'm talking about, I think today's episode will really help you to kind of see where you're going. So let's get started, shall we? Game masters have to prepare because the players are going to be wanting to hear a story, want to experience where you are at moment by moment, and get an idea of what's going on. Now, today's world, the game masters are required to get everything situated and then align the characters' backstories with the story that he's building, and develop the mechanism for play within the parameters of what the players already understand. Now, in Nikos RPG, the story doesn't really wait for the players to, quote, get on track. The player's insertion into the session is not scripted or with any particular set paths, but the players instead start to develop their understanding of the world by the narrative that the game master provides. This lack of a intricately constructed, pre-developed, and predefined story arc requires the players and the storyteller to develop a more natural, conversation-based style of play. The directors present the world and the events therein narratively, and then treat these actions as if they were already ongoing, and then the players can determine where and how they wish to engage with this story. They may not even wish to, and that's okay too. Perhaps you want to reclaim a piece of that feeling. We will be talking about how that happens, and the main thing to realize is that the pre-generated persona don't have to be there. It's not a requirement for you to have a full understanding of what the players are bringing to the table even, but instead the players step directly into the role, adapt to the setting as defined, and the story therefore unfolds organically as the players put in their input. That means there's no waiting for the GM to have to reveal the quest. The players will discover it incrementally as the play continues. There's no need to worry about derailing the game because there's no rail. There's no foundational must happen occurrences. And every decision the players make, therefore, is more meaningful because the world moves on regardless of any script. There's no requirement for a checkbox for the players to have seen an event or whatever for it to have happened. It simply will have existed. In modern role-play games, world building is done generally before the players even sit down to play. Players are given pre-written histories, or they build their own backstories. They build structured settings, and generally you're playing in a predefined culture. Now the result is that the players are not playing the characters, they are visiting another person's world. They are the way I describe it is they're playing above the board. They're looking down at the campaign setting and are in a way capable of meta play even from the beginning because they have perhaps at least a passing understanding of the world that they are in because they agreed to these forms and foundations which actually move you away from imagination into imitation. In a way, what this really means is that you are no longer required to do what role-play games were based on, and that is they don't demand or require you to imagine. You can just visualize the things that are within the framework you've already agreed to, and therefore gameplay is always going to be overshadowed by what's permissible within that universe. Now, instead of using a pre-designed setting, the concept behind the Nikos RPG is that every storyteller has his own frame and concept. Maybe it draws upon certain cultural norms, perhaps it draws upon the works of others in terms of its source, but it is more akin to the idea of your interpretation of the world as a storyteller being translated to the players through the interactions of the game. It means that in the Nikos mechanism, the very process of world building becomes a part of play, not only on the part of the game master who's building the elements of the story, but it's also up to the personas, the characters in the game, to actually bring the life to the tabletop. This definitely encouraged the players to actually be more creative and innovative and to be a part of the process. You see, each character is defined by its base numbers, as any role-playing game would, but it's also established by the species from which they derive, which provides them with a series of unique marks. And there is enough variance within even the marks process that players, even if they're playing the same species, will have differences between them that will be distinctive and identifiable. The players will also have a concept of their culture, not in a defined narrative, you must do this or you must do that. Instead, it's the opportunity for them to build out what they took from the culture that they derived from, and therefore have a better, more deep understanding of their player identity as that character. In addition, they also will have their this place also ties into their role in the world and what drives them. And since there are as many drives as there are players, this is a virtually infinite number of potentials, making each game and each player's character absolutely unique. And these numbers are filled in, and as they develop the character, they define define them within the framework of the world, and therefore a fixed point that therefore the world and the story revolves around them. So they don't have to definitely know a city from which they come from, but they understand the concepts of the factions that might have affected them growing up. Instead of following a fixed history, the players shape their history as the game unfolds. They don't necessarily have a knowledge of their backstory because they are actually starting in the process of already being a living being in the world. This is not just a feature of Nikos, but it's the very heart of how gameplay occurs. When we were kids, going back to the playground, we simply took on a role and we didn't ask questions about what we defined what we looked like and how we felt about things, but that would be in the state of in the continuation of the state of play. It wasn't necessarily something that was mandated or required. Most of us have the awareness that rules have some flexibility to them, and the more precise the rules become, the more rigid the guardrails become. You don't want to break the illusion. You don't want to break out of the story. And the principal benefit of Nikos mechanism is that you're not actually tied to the rules from the standpoint of guardrails. Instead, they're, as the pirates would say, more of guidelines. So in early tabletop roleplay games, the rules were outlined, but if a game master wanted to ignore or wave past one of them, it was just something that was done. If it made sense and it sounded fun, the GM would say yes, and you'd just move on. This concept of rule of cool really became the center of what Nikos RPG embraces, because it breaks your skills into broad intuitive categories instead of rigid proficiency and prerequisite systems. The players describe their actions, define their skills, and the game master interprets how they fit into the mechanics of the scene and whether or not they make sense. This removes the hesitation that normally kills creativity. The rules don't limit the actions, but instead they empower the players to push the story forward and make the game their own. Tying into this is the idea that we give ourselves permission to play. When we were kids, it was parents said, "Get out, go play, get out and go do something," and from the moment we stepped out the door, we were in that playful place. Our brains were already attuned to the idea of, okay, we're creating something because we are not any longer bound by the limits that our home life required. And that means we are able to therefore bring back the chaotic, unpredictable fun of the past, because we've developed a mechanism just for doing so. If, for example, your group is amenable to it, you can actually choose to have a session or a series of sessions that are based on the concept of role play roulette. At NikosRPG.com, there is a roulette wheel that includes not just the 6 published genres of the world of Nikos, but a whole raft of other genres that are currently in development. And that mechanism allows you to literally spin a wheel, a virtual wheel on your telephone or your laptop or your computer, and that will therefore randomly generate a choice for one of the, I think it's 20 genres that are there on the list. And once you've rolled that up, the GM randomly creates a story in the same time that it takes for a player to create their persona. Now that seems like a rash claim, but the reality is that the mechanism utilizing the location, what do I call it? The community identity sheet, or CIS. You can actually, using dice just as you would for a persona, build out the parameters for the adventure, including what knowledges might be available, what types of beings might be there, etc. And this eliminates the over planning because it makes it so that you are literally building the adventure as the players are building their characters. And it really enforces the players to engage with the world that you've created in real time, even as they're building their persona, because they can ask you questions about what's going on in your creative process, and you can provide them feedback about what they want to do. And whether we are talking about the 6 published genres, Dark Shards, Downshift, Dawn Soldier, Dread Signs, Deep State, and so on, let me say it, so on. There are no others. But in addition to that, there are the others that are not yet published, District 7, Division 7, Delta Sector, and so on. These are different ways of playing that haven't even fully been fleshed out. So you as players and as directors, game masters in your own right, can actually utilize these as creative jump-off points for whole new ideas of how you're going to role play in those environments. Fundamentally, I'm asking you to get ready to go back out to the playground, because the point of play is to give yourself permission to not be inside the work ethic. You don't have to pre-build, you don't have to meta play, you don't have to do anything. It simply allows you to engage with other players in the real time of the game session. Now here's the secret. Nikos isn't a game. Nikos RPG, yes, it's published as a toolbox for building adventures and for defining a world for yourself, or worlds. But the idea here is that the Nikos mechanism is actually a philosophy for rediscovery. It's how we get back to playing like we played before. And when we have the ability to experience role play as we did back then with the sheer joy of play, we can really be free of all of the limitations that a cookie cutter, predefined, pre-imagined game world, and actually start to enjoy ourselves again. If you want to experience this right now, you can go to nikosrpg.com, download the free-to-play I'm trying to remember. Yes, it's the free-to-play master book mechanism. It's like an 11-page document that provides you with the basics of how to run a role-play game. And you can also grab persona packets there for your players as free downloads and start playing right now. Because the best RPG sessions aren't about winning or optimizing, about framing a worldview that matches up with somebody's cookie cutter mechanism. Instead, it's about laughing, dreaming, and playing like we used to. I want to thank you for joining me for today and hope to see you in our next episode. I record every day or generally every day, and post in the afternoons. So thanks again for being here, and we will see you in the next episode.